My name's Colin Koubek. I'm a research associate at the Cal Poly Strawberry Center, and I'm going to be talking about a trial that we did this summer in collaboration with TRIC and Betaravia Farms to trial out their bug vacuum for Lygus bug. Can everyone see the screen? All right.
Yes.
So just to quickly overview, I'll go into the design and methods, then talk about the results and go over a cost analysis that will answer how much are you getting in return per acre with the TRIG buck vacuum, then go over some theoretical stuff on thresholds and what should the threshold be for when you start vacuuming. And then lastly, I'm going to talk a little bit about some work I've done on UVC as an ovicidal for multiple strawberry pests. So the layout is very similar between the conventional and organic ranch. At the organic ranch, it's about 9.6 acre blocks, and at the for the organic ranch, and about 6.5 acres on the conventional ranch. Fortaleza was the cultivar for both of these, and these blocks were split in half with the spray-only section on the western half and the spray plus vacuum section on the eastern half. And each block was treated as a replicate, so although it's not a randomized trial, it was replicated with 5 replicates per treatment. And just something to note here is that the vacuum section is on the downwind side of each of these fields, so that's just something to keep in mind for interpreting this data. And I forgot to mention, please interrupt me at any time throughout the presentation if you have any questions. So for the sampling, I used a battery-powered Ryobi vacuum to sample the plants, and I followed these black lines going up and down the blocks to get 2 subsamples per replicate, and I was sampling about 40 plants with this vacuum. And then for sampling the cat-face fruit, I'd go up the middle of these blocks following these red lines, and I would look at 10-foot sections of the strawberry bed. So the cat face sampling was categorized into 3 different sections. First is Lygus cat facing, then pollination cat facing, and then both. And like I said, measured in 10-foot sections, and anything over 50% red was harvested. And we did this to beat the harvesters to the cold fruit because we were only out there 1 time a week sampling that cat face fruit, whereas they're out there 2 to 3 times a week harvesting, so we wanted to make sure to count all those cold fruit before they got to it. So something that we'd categorize as Lygus cat facing is where the achenes in the distorted area are all the same size. So these are 2 images and examples of what that looks like. And then for pollination cat facing, the achenes would be different sizes in this distorted area, and this can be due to weather extremes or different nutrient deficiencies. And then the both category was just something we were unclear about. So maybe some sections of the fruit have distorted areas where the achenes are the same sizes. Other areas of the fruit, it looks to be different sizes. So the both category was just kind of used for a I'm not sure category. So looking at total Lygus in the organic field, total Lygus being nymphs plus adults per 20 plants. On this May 17th date was the pre-sample before we divided the fields into the 2 treatment areas. And then throughout the end of May and into June, doesn't look to have too much separation up until that June 26th date, where the vacuum starts to drop much below the spray-only category. And then that trend holds for the rest of July and into August. And you could see these generational changes where the Lygus population is going up and down. This may be due also to just a knockdown organic spray that temporarily reduced them. But throughout the rest of this trial, that gap between these two treatments is pretty consistent after that June 19th date. And excluding the pre-sample, on average, the spray plus vacuum had about 4 per 20, and the spray only had about 6.3. So with a beat box or a sweep net, the Ligas threshold is about 1 per 20 plants, and with the battery-powered vacuum like I was using to sample, it's more like 2 per 20. And you can see that this is above threshold pretty much the entire time in both the areas, so that'll really contrast what the conventional field looks like. But overall, 36% proportional reduction with the vacuum over the course of this entire treatment or experiment. And then looking at SWD, SWD didn't spike until very late in the experiment, so we don't have too many data points on that and not really a ton of confidence in these results, but the overall trend looks really good here with the vacuum, and 57% proportional reduction in SWD once the population spiked, and that average is getting weighted by that 8/14 date where that separation is really big. Now looking at the conventional field, the pre-sample done on that May 19th date. And then for the beginning of June, it looks pretty good except for this June 3rd date. And same for July, but on this July 3rd date. And these 2 points where on June 3rd and July 3rd, where the vacuum kind of meets at the spray only, they coincide with when the robot was down due to mechanical issues. So in the week leading up to that June 3rd and July 3rd date, the vacuum wasn't running. So if you take those points out of consideration, it looks really good. The trend looks good over time with the vacuum being under the spray only pretty much for the entirety of the experiment. And something that is a big difference between the conventional field and the organic field is you'll see that this is pretty much under threshold the entire time for the experiment. But even though it is under threshold for the entire experiment, it still has a very similar proportional reduction. So 39% reduction in total Ligas compared to the 36 on the organic field. So it seems, despite the population levels of the Ligas, that proportional reduction seems to stay constant with about 0.7 in the vacuum over the entirety of the experiment and 1.1 in the spray only. So looking at SWD for the conventional, also didn't spike until late in the season, so not too many data points. But once it did spike, pretty good separation between the treatments and a very similar proportional reduction compared to the 57% reduction in the organic field, 59% reduction. So proportionally seems very on par with each other in terms of the Ligas reduction and SWD reduction across both organic and conventional fields. So looking at the cat-faced berries, about half of the cat facing was due to Ligas in the organic field and 37% due to pollination. And the weekly average of cold berries in that 10 feet was about 1.5 less cold berries due to Ligas per 10 feet with the vacuum, and about 1 less, not statistically significant, with pollination. And then both seem to be on par with each other. And then looking at the conventional field, more of that cat facing was due to pollination in the conventional field. And I believe that's because in the conventional field, the canopy was much more grown out and bushier. So the wind would most likely have a harder time agitating the flowers in that canopy. Whereas in the organic field, the plants were much more open and the wind is able to get in there much better. So I think that's why we might see less pollination cat facing in the organic field and more in the conventional. But looking at the Ligas cat facing, about 2.5 less cat face berries per 10 feet with the vacuum and less pollination and just overall cold fruit in the both category as well. So something that's said a lot that I've heard is bug vacuums cause pollination cat facing. And just looking at it passively through this study in both of these fields, that does not seem to be the case at all. So going into the cost analysis portion now, we're trying to get these berries that are measured in 10-foot sections out to how much are you losing per acre. So these are estimates, and keep that in mind. The amount of manpower required to actually get an exact measurement would be pretty much undoable, but these are just estimates to see what the differences are between the vacuum and just the spray only. So multiply it out by about 817 to get to the acre with the number of cold berries. And then assuming there's 21 berries per clamshell, that was based off of basket counts that Betaravia sent me, and 8 clamshells per crate. And you'll see why this 4.28 weeks in a month is important later on. So these prices are USDA prices. I did one for Betaravia with Driscoll's pricing, so I could send you those slides as well if you'd like to see that. But the story is the same, no matter whose pricing I put up there. So on average for the organics, it's about $15.3 per crate. And then when you multiply it all out with all of the multipliers that I showed on the previous slide, you'll get mean loss due to, this is just Lygus cat facing, not pollination or both counting into this either, for the spray plus vacuum versus the spray only section with 95% confidence intervals. And then I ran a t-test between these two values and just looked at what is the savings with the vacuum across per week across the course of this experiment. So none of the t-test values were significant, but later on it gets very close to getting significant. And you'll notice this trend of returns seems to really become a lot stronger after this July 29th date and onward. And if you remember back to the graph of total Lygus at the organic ranch, that separation really started to happen at the beginning of July. So just Lygus today doesn't mean cat facing today. It's going to mean cat facing in the future. So I think once that separation started to happen, then you see those returns come 3 to 4 weeks later in the cat face fruit from the reduction in Lygus. So overall, taking out $25 extra on top of the UV to apply the vacuum at twice per week. So 50 just for the vacuum, and I'm only adding the vacuum because we're looking at Lygus, and Betaravia was already using the UV on the entire ranch. They just wanted to isolate, is it worth it to use the vacuum in addition to UV, and will that pay off? So taking out the cost of vacuuming and the average weekly savings, get about $90 back per acre. It'd be a little different with the Driscoll's pricing, but still positive. And $386 per acre per month, so about 180% ROI. And then going into the conventional ranch, on average, it's about $10.60 to the crate. Multiplying it out, doesn't look as high with the spray plus vacuum, and this vacuum savings looks a lot more positive here than with the organic ranch, which is surprising. And there are multiple weeks where it is statistically significant using the t-test, especially this 710 and 717, as well as if you were to average all the weeks up as well. And you're looking at an even better ROI with the conventional ranch, with about $109 per acre per week returned, or $467 per acre per month returned after accounting for the cost of the vacuum. And the reason why this is so surprising is because if you remember, the conventional ranch was under threshold for the entire course of the experiment. So it's really interesting to see that you can still be under threshold getting reduction, and it's still going to be net positive for return to the bank. And that's why I created this theoretical vacuum threshold, and I did a little bit of work on it with a regression, and it just wasn't too great of a regression, so I didn't really want to show it. But this is just a suggestion for how to move forward with thinking about when to vacuum in the future. But you take the cost of vacuuming and the projected price per crate 3 to 4 weeks out, because that ligus is going to damage it more like 3 to 4 weeks out, and the projected yield then. And if you were to figure out this slope, what is the relationship between the cat facing and the percentage point cat facing of the total yield with the ligus threshold that you have? And then your K is pretty much the efficacy. So in this case, it was 36 and 39% reduction. So that would be 0.36 and 0.39. So just going through an example of if you were to use this threshold and your projected cost was at $16 per crate, 3 to 4 weeks out, and you had these 3 different scenarios of projected yield 3 to 4 weeks out. And this is just a hypothetical slope, but then using the efficacy that we found in this experiment at 500 crates per week, projected a few weeks out, the threshold would be about 1.4 ligus. And with 100 crates per week, it would be 7. So it's important to consider how much fruit you're going to get in the future, because at the end of the season, you may not be projecting that many crates per acre 3 to 4 weeks out. So if you were to use, and aside from the vacuum, if you were to use a very expensive chemical treatment, but you're only going to get 50 to 100 crates per week way down the line, is it even worth it at that point? So using the threshold to really determine if you're going to break even, I think, is important. And I think that threshold of just 2 per 20 or 1 per 20 isn't really the best way to go about it, because a threshold really depends on a lot of things. So it's hard to just give one threshold for every single treatment out there, because that threshold is going to depend on the cost of that treatment. It's going to depend on the cost of the berries being sold, and that relationship between the pest and the damage and the money lost, and the efficacy of that product overall. So thresholds are really fluid with how efficacious a product is and how much that product costs. So going into the UVC ovicidal effects, so the egg killing effects, I looked at two-spotted spider mite and Lewis mite, and the way I went about this was putting 2 of the adults of each species on a leaf disc, and then counting up the number of eggs they laid, removing those adults, and pinning them to the underside of leaves out in the field like this. And this was to assess how good of coverage is the robot getting on the underside of the leaves to kill these mite eggs. So I pinned them there, and then after the UVC robot went over it, I would remove these, store them in a dark box overnight, and then put them in a growth chamber and count up the egg hatch for the different treatments 8 days after the UVC was applied. And for ligus, we used these parafilm egg packs, which had the ligus eggs within them, and we placed these in the middle of the crown. And parafilm really acts as a good proxy for the plant material that ligus deposit their eggs into, because both parafilm and plant material are impenetrable by UVC. So for Lewis mite eggs, these medium dosages, about 400 to 550, get pretty good egg kill. About in this first trial in April, a much bigger egg kill than in that second trial, but these higher dosages get a really, really good egg kill, and it's about, from the control to the higher dosage, about an 80% reduction. So looking at 2-spot, something to note here is that with the Lewis mite, the control egg hatch was much higher. It was about at 90%, whereas with two spot, that control egg hatch is about 70%. So proportionally, the reduction is pretty similar between two spot and Lewis mite. And these low dosages still getting really good egg kill, and the high dosages pretty much annihilating any eggs on that leaf disc. And then for Lygus eggs, the first trial, nothing came out statistically significant, although there were numerically lower egg hatch rates with the UVC treatments. And part of why that might have not been statistically significant was it had fewer replications than that second trial that we did in July, where the medium dosage did statistically separate from the control. And the interesting thing here with Lygus eggs is that it does not seem to be a dose-dependent relationship. The highest dosage does not seem to get the best kill. And I think this graphic may help explain why that is the case. So depending on the depth that the Lygus insert their eggs into the plant material, I think will affect how the UVC kills those eggs. So at these E and F portions of the graphic, that egg is sticking out a little bit more and the embryo is a little bit more exposed, which allows the UVC to kill those eggs that aren't deposited as deep. Whereas A, B, C, and D, they're more flush with the plant material, which UVC can't go through that plant material, and the Lygus eggs have a hardened little cap. So I think that protects the embryo from getting fried by the UVC. So I think the variability that I saw in the egg hatch between the different dosages of UVC really just depended on what the depth of the eggs deposited into the parafilm was. So overall take-home message is UVC is a great mite overside and gets good coverage on the underside of the leaves, has a modest egg kill, and the bug vacuum seems to be profitable in both organic and conventional settings, but it has to be measured over time due to that cat facing showing up a few weeks later, and then that'll end up accumulating the more weeks you run that trial. And to use thresholds are important to really breaking even and knowing when that is going to be a beneficial management practice. And then lastly, the SWD showed really good trends, but needs a lot more research to determine if it's a very solid strategy for managing SWD. And that's all I've got.